You don't deserve the truth. That's what Marcus said when I found the hotel receipts in his jacket pocket. The venue smelled like gardenias and fresh paint. I could hear the caterer inside, counting chairs for next Saturday's reception. His mother adjusted her pearl bracelet. His father looked at his phone. I folded the receipts carefully, smoothed my navy dress, and chose silence. No confrontation, no tears. I stood up and walked toward the bridal suite. 10 minutes later, the music stopped and a gasp echoed through the chapel. Here's what happened next. The morning air was crisp in Charleston, the kind that carries magnolia and old money. Marcus had chosen St. Matthew's Chapel for its southern charm, the kind of place where people posed on marble steps just to prove they belonged. The sanctuary glowed with white roses and candles floating in crystal bowls. Every pew inside shimmered under stained glass windows. Mine apparently held a secret I wasn't supposed to find. I'd driven over alone from my apartment, replaying his mother's last text in my head. Please, Sarah, everything perfect tomorrow. It's our family's reputation. That was all I ever was to them. A checklist item, a photo opportunity. Don't ask questions. Don't make waves. Don't remind anyone you're not born into this. Growing up middle class, we were the classic story you see in romance novels, the golden boy and the scholarship girl. Marcus had trust funds and country club memberships. I had student loans no one mentioned. He'd charm and get praised. I'd work hard and get tolerated. His mother said I was practical. His father said I was grounded. Both meant the same thing. Useful was temporary. The last time I felt truly welcomed was Christmas 2 years ago. I remember the house smelling like bourbon cake and lemon polish. Marcus was in Aspen with college friends, and for once, the conversation felt natural. His grandmother asked me to help find an old photo album in her bedroom drawer. Instead, I found her leather address book, edges worn from decades of use. I flipped through it, curious, until I realized every page had careful notes. Marcus's first girlfriend, lovely family, Marcus's college sweetheart, senator's daughter. Not a single note about me, not my background, not my name. When I asked why, she smiled like it was obvious. You're still so new, dear. We're still getting to know you. That night, I learned there are two kinds of acceptance: being welcomed and being evaluated. I thought about that address book as I walked toward the chapel, heels clicking on flagstone. Through the arched door, you're scheduled for final dress fitting at noon. I nodded, waiting for her to mention the obvious. She didn't. The hotel receipts. Still folded in my purse. I followed her gesture toward the bridal suite and felt the familiar weight of secrets pressing against my chest. From the hallway, I could see the entire chapel, every detail, every careful arrangement. But there was something missing, something that made my stomach turn. Trust. I set my purse on the vanity table, those small white receipts still hidden inside, and stared at my reflection. Marcus was greeting early guests in the sanctuary. His mother was directing the florist. Outside, I sat with the evidence of his lies and told myself the same thing I'd said for months. It's just cold feet. Everyone gets nervous. But the truth was burning in my chest, quiet and undeniable. Maybe everyone did get nervous. But that didn't mean they spent 3 nights last week at the Ritz with someone named Jessica. I tried to focus on the fitting like always, but the bridal suite wasn't peaceful. Staff came and went through the service entrance, carrying garment bags and whispering under their breath. Every time the door opened, I caught glimpses of the chapel, flowers swaying, guests arriving, his mother's hand on Marcus's shoulder like a blessing of approval. Then the footsteps stopped. I looked up and saw Marcus walking toward me, boutonniere in one hand, cufflinks glinting like promises. He stopped just short of the doorway, his reflection doubled in the mirror. 2 versions of him, one beloved outside, one false inside. Well, he said, tilting his head. Ready for tomorrow's performance? I blinked. What's that supposed to mean? He smiled, that half smile I'd seen since we started dating. The one he used before changing the subject. You don't deserve the truth. The words landed so casually I almost missed how cruel they were. You don't deserve the truth. Like it was a privilege. Like I was beneath honesty. For a second, I said nothing. My throat went tight, the kind of tightness that comes from swallowing too much doubt. Behind him, the photographer was calling, "Groom, we need you for family portraits." He didn't move. He wanted me to accept it, to smile, to prove his point. I didn't. I just looked at him long enough for his smirk to falter. "You know," I said quietly, "there's always been space for honesty between us. You're the one who keeps hiding things." His eyes narrowed. "Oh, please, Sarah. Not everything's about your feelings. You make everything complicated." Mother. The name hit harder than I wanted it to. I pictured that address book again, every page noting other women, and none marking my place. "I'm not complicated," I said. "You just don't like that I notice things." He rolled his eyes. "You sound paranoid and insecure. Face it, Sarah. Nobody needs your drama. Not here, not tomorrow." He turned and walked away, leaving a trail of cologne and dismissal. I watched him go, his perfect posture carrying him back to his perfect family, and felt the familiar sting behind my eyes. But this time, it didn't hurt the same way. It burned cleaner. When the door closed behind him, I picked up the hotel receipts from my purse. The evidence I'd found the night before, folded in careful silence. I traced the dates once, then slipped them into the wedding program basket. If they wanted their perfect day, fine. But I wasn't walking down that aisle empty-handed. Not this time. For a while, I just sat there, fingers pressed against the smooth edge of the receipts, listening to the muffled sound of organ music drifting through the chapel doors. It was supposed to be rehearsal time, a perfect run-through. I imagined his mother dabbing tears, his father nodding approvingly, Marcus basking in the attention, the same scene I'd watched my whole engagement from the sidelines. But sidelines had edges. I stood up slowly. My reflection caught in the vanity mirror, still composed, maybe even graceful if you didn't look too closely. Inside my purse, my phone felt heavier than it should. I had Jessica's contact information now, found it the night before when I'd done what any woman would do. A few careful searches had turned into confirmation. She wasn't just a name on hotel receipts. She was posting photos from their dates, thinking I'd never see them. 3 hours later, I'd made a choice that could shatter the image Marcus had built out of lies. I opened my laptop, created a shared album, and uploaded everything. The hotel receipts, the photos, the messages I'd screenshot from her social media. Then I sent one simple invitation to the family group chat: "Some photos from this week you might want to see before tomorrow." Before leaving the bridal suite, I walked back to the chapel entrance. The rehearsal was in full swing, Marcus's voice echoing as he practiced his vows. His mother was taking photos, his father checking his watch. I added the hotel receipts to the program basket on the welcome table, right where guests would pick them up tomorrow morning. My handwriting was neat on a small card, "For those who deserve the truth." I stepped back, checked my reflection. I could hear faint laughter behind me, voices planning a wedding that would never happen. For the first time in months, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel naive. I reached the parking lot, gravel crunching under my heels like punctuation. No dramatic speech, no confrontation, just the quiet satisfaction of a car door closing. As I started the engine, I looked back once at the glowing windows, the silhouettes moving behind glass, and whispered to myself, "Let them see who he really is." Inside the chapel, organ music still floated above hushed conversations. A violinist tuned her strings. Programs rustled. The family pressed closer around the couple at the altar, Marcus glowing in that perfectly pressed tuxedo, the picture of Southern gentleman he'd rehearsed for years. His mother beamed from the front pew, the camera flashes painting everything golden. From outside through the tall windows, the scene looked like a painting, framed, flawless, unreal. Then the phone started buzzing. It happened during the final blessing. His aunt had opened the shared album first, her gasp audible 3 pews back. Someone whispered, "What is this?" His mother turned, frowning, and pulled out her phone. The screen filled with photos: Marcus and Jessica at dinner, at the hotel bar, her hand on his chest outside room 412. Her face went white. "What's this?" His father leaned over. The album scrolled down to show the hotel receipts, dates circled in red. March 15th, 18th, 21st. This week. His eyes caught the restaurant charges, the room service, the checkout times that told the whole story. The organ music didn't stop right away. It just wavered. The violinist noticed the distraction, missing her cue. Marcus's voice cracked mid-vow as whispers spread through the pews. His eyes found his mother's face, saw the horror dawning there, and his perfect composure began to crack. "What's going on?" he asked, voice thin. His mother didn't answer. She just kept scrolling, page after page. Each image was worse than the last. Messages from Jessica about our little secret, photos of them in bed, receipts from the same restaurants where he'd claimed to be at bachelor parties. "Who sent this?" his mother hissed. His grandmother, Catherine, had been watching from the front pew. When she saw my name on the shared album, her expression hardened with slow understanding. She rose with the deliberate grace of someone used to family crises. "I think you should look at the programs before you blame anyone," she said quietly. "These came with instructions to check before the ceremony." Marcus's face drained of color. "That's not possible." His father's voice was. The photographer lowered her camera. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Marcus lunged for the receipts. "You can't believe that." Catherine stepped between them. "We believe what we can see, sweetheart. And we can see everything." That was when the shouting started. Not loud at first, more like air being forced through a broken valve. Marcus stumbled backward, his perfectly knotted tie suddenly feeling like a noose. "No, you don't understand. Sarah's lying. She's jealous. She's always been." "Stop." The single word cracked through the chapel like thunder. His father stood, face dark with rage that had been building for 27 years. "You did this. You humiliated this family and thought no one would ever find out who you really are." Every face had turned toward them now. The organist lifted her hands from the keys. A child's voice asked, "Daddy, what's happening?" Marcus's perfect rehearsal was dissolving, and he couldn't hold it together anymore. He spun toward his mother. "Do something. Fix this." His mother, Margaret, stood frozen near the altar, her cream silk dress suddenly feeling like costume. His father looked at the chapel floor, jaw clenched tight. For once, neither rescued him. "You knew," his father said quietly, voice shaking now. "You knew exactly what you were doing to that girl." He reached into his jacket, pulled out his phone, and started typing. "I'm calling Sarah right now to apologize." Marcus stared at the phone like it was a weapon. "You can't, Dad. You can't humiliate me like this." "I'm not humiliating you," his father said. "You did that yourself." Someone turned off the organ entirely. The chapel fell into a silence so deep it seemed to echo. Then came the sound the family would remember, Marcus's voice breaking as reality hit him. "She's behind this," he cried. "Sarah's behind all of it." Catherine exhaled slowly. "Funny. The only thing Sarah did was tell the truth." Outside, I'd parked by the river, engine cooling. The glow from the chapel windows reflected across the water. I couldn't hear every word, but I heard when the organ stopped. The silence that followed was sharp and complete, broken only by the sound of car doors slamming as guests began to leave. The sound I'd needed my whole engagement, not out of cruelty, but closure. Inside, Marcus's boutonniere had fallen to the floor. "You'll regret this," he shouted, voice cracking. His father turned away, shoulders heavy with disappointment. "No," but Marcus only laughed, a sound so hollow it didn't reach his eyes. "Apologize to her? She's not even family." His father shook his head slowly. That's where you're wrong. She deserved better than this. He left it at that, turning away, shoulders sagging as he followed the crowd toward the exit. By the time the chapel lights dimmed and the staff began collecting scattered programs from the floor, Marcus sat alone at the altar. His tuxedo, once immaculate, now looked rumpled and small. The boutonniere had wilted beside his shoe. The same hands that had dismissed me now clutched at air, desperate for something solid to hold. He never called me. I was already home. Through my apartment window, I watched the city lights blur into watercolor streaks. It's all over social media already, a friend had texted. Did you see the photos? That poor girl. No, the other one, the fiancé. I didn't feel triumph, just quiet. I curled up on my couch and thought about the bridal suite, the smell of gardenias and fresh paint, the receipts that had started it all. How it began with a lie in his jacket pocket. How it ended with the truth shared with everyone who had ever looked through me. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered, now they know who he really is. The silence stretched, swallowed by the night. The river went still again, reflecting city lights like scattered stars. I made tea, pulled a blanket around my shoulders, and felt something I hadn't felt in months, peace. By the time morning came, the sky was pearl gray over Charleston. The church bells rang 7 o'clock, their sound carrying across empty streets. My phone had 17 missed calls from Marcus, 12 from his mother, 2 from numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't check any of them. The quiet was worth more than explanations. When I stepped onto my balcony, the air smelled faintly of coffee and river water. The city below was waking up, joggers on the bridge, early commuters heading to work. I hung my navy dress on the door and looked at it one last time. The deep color still perfect, untouched by the night's revelations. It looked like armor I hadn't known I was wearing. A new message appeared on my phone. Please call Sarah. We need to explain. That was Margaret. She always said that when things finally went wrong, we need to explain. But she had known all along. Every time she'd told me to be patient, every time she'd laughed at Marcus's dismissals, every time she'd said, boys will be boys. I put the phone face down on the counter and opened my laptop instead. A map of, they could keep their apologies, their explanations, their versions of the story. I had mine now. For the first time in my life, being alone didn't mean being abandoned. It meant being authentic. At my wedding rehearsal, I found hotel receipts in his jacket. This morning, I'm looking at plane tickets to Maine. Same truth, different response. Back then I would have stayed silent. Now I choose honesty. Sometimes the loudest revenge isn't a confrontation. It's the sound of your own voice finally telling the truth. They thought I'd always stay quiet, grateful for whatever scraps of love they offered. But I don't stay silent anymore. I don't beg for honesty at someone else's altar. I choose my own path. If you've ever been betrayed by someone who was supposed to love you, know this.